so much for coming today. I'm Nadia Whittam, I'm going to be chairing this panel, and welcome to this very, very important session. I know that we had stiff competition today, so I'm really glad that so many of you have chosen to be here, or at least couldn't get into the other sessions. I think this session is really important for a couple of reasons. So, firstly, the title of the session talks about the war on refugees and migrants, and that is exactly what is happening currently. Migrants and refugees have been scapegoated and demonised for such a long time, and the assault on their rights is only intensifying. We've got the hostile environment, discriminatory policies that fuel racism and xenophobia, and frankly just make the lives of many asylum seekers a misery, often leaving them destitute and in abject poverty. And that is absolutely an issue that the Labour movement should care about. We should care about it not just from a moral perspective, but also because this is a workers' rights issue. A lack of migrants' rights means that migrant workers aren't able to organise in their workplace without fear of deportation, and it's only about to get worse because the immigration bill, which creates a points-based immigration system, means that someone's ability to stay in the UK will be based on their wealth and sponsorship from an employer. So that basically means free movement for everyone who can afford it, and a hostile environment for everyone else. And it also gives the Home Secretary sweeping powers to rewrite the immigration rules, and that's with very little accountability to Parliament. Then we've got the Nationality and Borders Bill, which attempts to criminalise asylum seekers. It basically creates a two-tier asylum system which discriminates against some refugees, treats some as good and some as bad, as we've seen time and time again with the narrative of the deserving and the undeserving, whether it's migrants and refugees or working class people in this country on benefits. It's the same divide and rule tactic that this government and their allies in the establishment use again and again. And it differentiates between those refugees depending on how they came into the UK. But in reality, as we all know, most refugees aren't able to arrive via the so-called legal routes, because there aren't enough legal routes. So they'll be placed in the second tier, and they'll be treated differently, and potentially, at the very worst, sentenced to 4 years in prison. And that's not based on the legitimacy of their claim. That's based on the fact that they came via a boat or a lorry, people with no choice being criminalised for the situations that they found themselves in, through no fault of their own. And then Priti Patel's latest plans to push back boats of refugees in the Channel. That is dangerous, it's illegal, and if it goes ahead, people will die, and Priti Patel will have blood on her hands. So we have so much to organise around and to fight against, and that brings me to the other reason why this is such an important panel, because in the face of this massive wholesale assault on refugees and migrants, people are resisting. And this session we'll be hearing about some of those remarkable campaigns, which I think it's fair to say have provided a light in what often feels like the darkness of hostility towards migrants. We have, firstly, I'll introduce everyone first and then I'll hand over to Ben to kick off. We have Ben Smoke, a journalist and activist and the political editor of Huck magazine, and Ben is also one of the Stansted 15, the absolute legends. Round of applause for Ben. Ben's looking very embarrassed now, but it's true. Sorry, not sorry. Next, we'll have Zita Holborn, a human rights community and trade union activist. Zita is the co-founder and national chair of Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts UK, and is also part of the Stop Tyranny campaign. Round of applause for Zita, please. And then we have Richard. Richard joins us from Channel Rescue, which is a grassroots human rights monitoring organisation, and that was set up in response to the government's increased securitisation and militarisation in the Channel. And then lastly, we were going to be joined by Gulwali Pasaleh, who's an activist, author and Afghan refugee, but sadly Gulwali's not able to be with us today, so I'll be reading out his words, which are extremely powerful. But we're not going to just talk about resistance today, we're going to put it into practice as well. And straight after this session, there will be a demonstration outside the nearby TUI offices, who are involved in deportation flights, of course. So please join us afterwards to protest their involvement in the war on refugees and migrants. I'm going to hand over to Ben now to get the panel underway. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, mate. I'm just going to start by apologising for reading off my laptop. I generally don't make notes or write stuff, and it leads to me just sort of meandering around the avenues of my mind until I eventually reach a point. So I felt like I should maybe try and deploy some brevity and clarity here. So apologies if you're at Young Labour yesterday, because a lot of this is recycled, but save the planet. Green New Deal, which just passed. I just found out. In August of 2015, my friend threw a house party. It was the second in a now legendary set of house parties themed around Disco Riot. I will get to a point, I promise. I wrote this as well. The walls were daubed with a tapestry of the poll tax riots that my mates had painstakingly drawn and obviously sweated off the walls within an hour. After a few hours of us enjoying ourselves, we kind of decanted upstairs, and the conversation turned to the so-called migrant crisis. Now, if you cast your eyes back to that time, 2015 was the year when over 1 million people tried to gain access to Europe via routes in the Mediterranean, and it was a deadly year. Over 3,000 people, if I remember correctly, died. It was a year in which rhetoric really ramped up. It was when David Cameron referred to those desperately trying to get to sanctuary and safety as a swarm. It was when Katie Hopkins said that we should send warships into the Mediterranean. So as a group of queer lefties kind of sitting in North London, we were trying to figure out what we could do, and it came very, very kind of soon after the film Pride came out. Has anyone seen it? Yeah. Okay, much different response to Young Labour yesterday, where 2 of them had fucking seen it. I'm not that fucking old. Mate, I can't. So, as you know, and they didn't, the film is about a group called Lesbians, Gay Support and Minors who came together in the 1980s to stand in solidarity with minors who were striking against the Thatcher government. Communities across the country who'd seen union funds sequestered, who were essentially trying to be starved into submission. And this group of gay men and lesbians in London decided that they weren't going to stand for it. So they went out, they fundraised, they twinned with a community in the southwest, in South Wales, in the Delice Valley. They raised the most amount of money, they bought a new van. And so we were kind of talking about that and talking about what we could do. And my friend Morton, who may well be here, he sent me a vague text at some point, suggested, what about lesbians and gays support the migrants? And from that moment, the group was born. So we quickly organised open meetings and collections for a charity called La Berge de Migrants. Sorry if you're French, I fucked that. Who were organising who were organising donations to those living in the jungle camp. We began to organise demos outside of the Home Office, including one on the morning of the third reading of what would become the Immigration Act 2016, where a few of the group let their own blood from their arms through cannulas. I didn't, because they couldn't find a vein. But while they were doing it, they were holding a sign which said, "An injury to one is an injury to all." That was one of the foundational messages of the film Pride, and it's a message that echoes through the history of our movement and movements. It is the fundamental bedrock upon which we started and organised Lesbians and Gay Support the Migrants. In February 2016, we organised a community pride event in Peckham alongside migrant-led groups. We did the same in February 2017. As much as we organised, supported and shouted, things continued to deteriorate. The hostile environment gathered pace. Our friends and comrades were locked up indefinitely, subjected to the most heinous abuse and torture at the hands of the state. Some of them were deported. It was at that point that we knew something else had to be done. A group of activists, mostly from the climate movement, came together with LGS migrants, and we began to plan an action to stop a deportation. That action eventually became the Stansted 15 action, which is when 15 of us gained access to a remote part of the airport at Stansted, locked ourselves around a deportation charter flight that was due to deport 57 people to Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone. On that flight, we knew of people who were vulnerable through amazing organisations like Detained Voices, who, if you've not heard of them, they're a group who have a number that is passed around, often detention centres or people who are at risk of being deported. People can ring them up and tell them their stories that would otherwise completely be lost and never heard by design as well. Through that, we learnt of several people supposed to be on that flight, but one of them really stuck with me, and it was a lesbian woman who'd been forced to marry in Nigeria. She'd given birth to a few different children. She was married to an abusive man. She'd escaped that marriage, came here, was kind of living out in the community, had friends, had a support network. She was detained and she was going to be deported on this flight. And 2 days before, her abusive ex-husband rang her and said, "I know you're being deported. I will be here waiting and I'm going to kill you." And she rang Detained Voices and she was obviously in bits. And the one piece of that testimonial that I remember is her just saying, "Please, who will look after my children if I die? Please, I am begging, I am begging." That's why we took the action. So we were then arrested. We were charged with aggravated trespass, criminal damage, and a Stansted bylaw. As expected, we thought we were going to have a 6-day trial in a magistrate's court. The maximum that we could have got was, I think, 3 months in prison. A couple of months later, we got an email through our lawyers who said the CPS have been in contact. They're thinking of changing the charge. I was like, oh yeah, to what? To a terror charge. And I do believe that my response was, oh, they're not. Grow up. It was funny, like it was genuine, it was a joke. I remember at Glastonbury that year, I was like the wrong side of not sober and just running around like, I'm a terrorist now. Because it seemed so ridiculous, and it was still up in the air and nothing had been confirmed. I was like, obviously they're not going to do that. Like, can you imagine? The only terrorism that happened that night was me murdering Beyonce as I was locked to that plane singing it. But then they did actually do it. And we were on trial. We eventually stood trial from October the 1st to December 10th, 2018. We were convicted of that terror offence. And we were sentenced in February of 2019 and narrowly avoided a very, very long stint in jail. The maximum sentence for that crime is life in prison. Part of the reason that that I'm here and not in prison is because of the huge mobilisation that happened after it. The incredible outpouring of movement. You know, there were 3,000 people outside of the Home Office within 24 hours of that happening. And it was incredible. 11 people who were due to be deported on that flight are still in the country. 5 of them have leave to remain. 2 of them have been given asylum, having been found to have been victims of human trafficking, who are at risk of re-trafficking had they have been deported. 1 was here to see the birth of his son. Another trained as a nurse and worked on the front lines during the pandemic. They are still here because of our action, but way more than that. They are here because of the actions of dozens of other people, from lawyers to caseworkers, activists and organisers. The action at Stansted brought some of those on the flight some time, but the real work, the real energy that kept them here in their homes, in their communities, with their friends and support networks often goes unspoken about. Now, lots have been written and said about the Stansted action. Some have called us brave. Amnesty, I think at one point were calling us human rights defenders, which is a bit much. Others were calling us traitors, terrorists, idiots, and worse. And the reality is, I don't think any of those labels really fit. I mean, maybe idiot most of the time, but the Stansted action was a simple act of solidarity. At its heart, it was a moment in which each one of the 15 of us took a personal, necessary action to use what means we had access to help our fellow human beings, to act in solidarity, to stand with rather than over, or rather in our case, to lie with. I said it earlier, but it does bear repeating. The foundation of our movement and the very bedrock upon which we stand is solidarity. It is coming together as a group of subjugated peoples, recognizing the commonality of our struggles, as well as the differences with them, and fighting back. On this, there is absolutely no doubt that the Labour Party has lost its way. It has, in too many guises, under too many different leaderships, been guilty of buying into a destructive narrative. One which pits groups against one another, a narrative which will see people fight for scraps and blame another. It's one that casts migrants against non-migrants, cis people against trans people, settled communities against nomadic ones, and loads of different others. As Nadia said earlier, it's divide and conquer. And that is the language of the elite. It is the oldest trick in the book. It is the modus operandi of a privileged coterie determined to retain the power and the resources that they have hoarded for centuries. The Labour Party, various members, MPs, factions are guilty of buying into this narrative, of attempting to fight a game of respectability that only leads to the further denigration of those who are most vulnerable in society, those who we must stand with, not simply hand out scraps to. The reality is quite simple, and particularly true on immigration. We cannot out-Tory the Tories. We cannot out-evil them. We should not try to do that. That should not be why we are here. The power of the Labour movement, the genesis of the Labour Party, and the fundamental thread that runs through every single major victory for the movement, be that social, economical, or political, is solidarity. It is standing proudly alongside one another, using our platform, our privilege, our moment, resources, and time to uplift the stories and struggles of those who would otherwise not be heard. Any credible Labour Party, any credible movement for progress, for socialism and justice must seek to stand in solidarity with those who are most at risk, most in need of help, support and comradeship. It must attack the damaging narratives of the elite, confidently put forward arguments for humanity and dignity for all. Without them, all they are is Tory line. This conference, this group of people must come together to fight for one another and for the millions of disempowered people across the country and the globe. It should be the core of who we are, of why we are. Solidarity forever, not just when it's convenient. Thank you.
That was absolutely incredible. Thank you, Ben. Next, I'm going to pass over to the iconic Zita Holborn.
Thanks, and greetings, everybody. I'm going to kind of start where Ben's left it, which is some of us have been fighting on these issues like for years and years and even decades. And before mass deportations, for example, were in the public domain, before the Windrush scandal was actually called the Windrush scandal, myself and others were campaigning on these issues. And we were warning in 2012, Barrack UK was formed in 2010. And we started as an anti-austerity organisation focused on the disproportionate impact of cuts and austerity on black workers, communities. Actually what we found is hand in hand with the impact of austerity and cuts came deepening racism, deepening injustice experienced by black communities. And when we use the term black, we're using it in its broadest political sense to encompass people from the African and Asian diasporas. And we recognise that actually the attack on migrant communities wasn't just actually about people who were new migrants coming into the country and settling in the UK. It was also about migrant communities who had raised children and grandchildren, people who were second or third generation in the UK. And so when the Immigration Act amendments started to come in, we co-formed with several other organisations the movement against xenophobia, MAX, to specifically focus around and campaign around those amendments that were coming in, the immigration bill that was being introduced to amend the Immigration Act. And we could count on less than two hands the number of MPs that supported us, which were Labour MPs, but very few of them. They were Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and a couple of others who, and this is of course before a new wave of MPs like Nati was even in place. And so it was a real battle and struggle from a parliamentary perspective to even get the Labour Party at that time to take these issues seriously, to care about them, or even to acknowledge that it was an issue. So it meant that we had to campaign on a grassroots level, and we had to coordinate campaigns against this. And we were warning then that what became known as the Windrush scandal was going to happen. We were warning people, if your immigration status is not regularised, you need to go and sort it out, you need legal representation and support. But for many people, they didn't realise that there was any issue at all. And if we look at what people were told, my parents' generation coming to the UK in the 1950s and 60s, that they were part of the British Empire. This was the mother country, they were British citizens. So nobody looked at their immigration status. If they came in on family members' passports as children or babies, they had no knowledge. So even with this warning we were giving out, to try and sort out your regularisation of your status, if you didn't even realise there was a problem, you're not going to know. But there was also a stigma attached to it and a fear that if you came forward to try and sort it out, actually you might be deported. So way before people knew there's a Windrush scandal, this is what it's about, there were people that have been stuck in the Caribbean and other countries, because although people think of the Windrush scandal about being focused on the Caribbean, it's actually about Commonwealth countries and former Commonwealth countries across the Asian and African diaspora and the Caribbean region that are impacted. And so people had already been, like for example, gone home for a holiday, go back to their home for the first time since settling in the UK. Sometimes it would be because they, for sad reasons, they'd gone to a funeral. And then when they were allowed to leave the country, when they tried to come back, they were told, you can't get on the plane. You don't have a passport, you don't have any papers. So they were literally stuck in limbo. So imagine if you went off for a 2-week holiday, you're not going to have sorted out anything at home. So by the time people did get back, some people died, some people had to fight for decades, not even just years, but decades to come back. I know people whose children had to not go to university, not go to college, start working at 16 just to save up money for legal fees and to get on a plane and go and visit their father or mother who was stuck in limbo. So a whole decade of their children's lives was stripped away from them. All the things they wanted to do or planned to do went out the window because their whole focus in life was trying to get justice and get their family members back. People lost their homes. they lost their jobs, they lost everything. So there are the people that were deported, but there are all these people that actually were just stuck in limbo and not allowed to come back to the UK. So around 8 years ago, we also recognised that there was a link between the impacts of climate change and migration and poverty and conflict and persecution. And often people are fleeing for a combination of those reasons, not just one reason. And we started to coordinate humanitarian aid distributions and convoys to people who were stuck in limbo in France. So you've got all these groups of people stuck in limbo in different places, not being able to progress with their life. And so we work very closely from that point onwards with L'Auberge de Migrants, who were mentioning in your speech as well as some other grassroots charities on the ground in northern France. And we've been doing that. The pandemic has stopped us in going, but we were going sort of bi-monthly or every 3 months, and we've been doing that for 7 or 8 years until the pandemic. And so we've had to redirect some of our funds to people who have no recourse to public funds in the UK, because we recognised during the pandemic those people who were trying to regularise their immigration status, allowed to work in the UK, lost their jobs because black people were the first people out the door when the pandemic hit and there were redundancies and cuts to jobs. They were more likely to work in precarious and temporary work, so therefore less likely to be furloughed and keep their job and the first out the door when jobs went. But they were not entitled to any government benefits and measures when it came to COVID. So even in my own area in London, I discovered there were whole families, some of them with young children and just having babies in the summer of last year, who had no money at all, no funds for their babies, and all the equipment is expensive when you have a baby, everything you need. And so we redirected some of our funds for refugees in France to families with no recourse to public funds in the UK. So what we're facing is an onslaught of attacks. You've got the people who are in the Windrush generation, and when people say, oh, well, the government's apologised, they've done a compensation scheme, it's all over, it's not. Because most people, the vast majority, have not received any compensation at all. They're still fighting for that. It's a complex system. You need legal representation, so it's not straightforward. And most people have had to appeal or challenge if they have got to that stage, because what's been offered is horrendously insulting in terms of your life being on hold, your life stripped apart, losing everything, the trauma, the stress, the impact on your physical and mental health, the impact on your entire family. Yeah, there is no compensation that can compensate with that. But if you're going to insult people with some tiny amount of money, that's not acceptable. So their lives are still on hold while they're still having to fight this. And so many people that I know of the Windrush generation, who are the ones that you've probably seen in the public domain speaking and in the newspapers, they have died along the way. People who've marched with us, in protest, are now dead and never even received that compensation. So there's that going on. But what the government are doing as well, taking us to the deportations and the TUI campaign, is they are deporting en masse on charter flights, entire planes full of people who are the children and grandchildren of the Windrush generation. And so it's continuing. And all of this comes as a legacy of enslavement and colonialism and empire. This is all part of that racist system and structure. This has not just happened in a vacuum. It hasn't happened by mistake. When the government tried to say we weren't specifically targeting this community, you destroyed the landing cards. You're branding our families and communities as criminals. People are criminalised by virtue of their immigration status. There was one woman who was a grandmother in the UK, has raised all her children and grandchildren in the UK. She was in the final stages of regularising her immigration status when her British husband died and the Home Office said, well, your husband's dead now, you don't need to stay, we can proceed with deporting you. It got challenged successfully, but this is the kind of thing that people are facing and have faced. And the reason why the children and grandchildren of the Windrush generation are here and may not have come, 30 years ago or whatever, is because it was hard and it was a struggle, and we faced no blacks, no dogs, no Irish signs. We're not allowed to get jobs, we're not allowed to get housing. So people had to bring their children bit by bit. And sometimes they were raised by grandparents, and then the grandparents have died in the Caribbean, and those children as adults or young teenagers or whatever have come to the UK to join whatever their next of kin is, which may be a parent, and then they're told you're here illegally. So the people that are being targeted are people now that they say have criminal records. So it effectively means that if you did something 10 years ago and you were involved in a crime 10 years ago, and sometimes there are miscarriage of justice, there are people that are being convicted under now defunct joint enterprise law, which is racist because black people are disproportionately stopped and searched, get harsher sentences, or are more likely to get a custodial sentence than their white counterpart. So it's all again part of a racist system why you're even in the criminal justice system. There are more young black men in jail than there are in university because of racism. Then you can be punished 10 years or 20 years down the line and told we're deporting you. And if you see these screaming headlines from the government, they say everyone's a rapist and murderer. Well, we talk to people that are booked on those flights on a one-to-one basis and support families and get them legal representation and help them through the process and system. And the vast majority are not rapists and murderers. Maybe on those planes there is a rapist and a murderer who has come to the UK recently. The majority are people like I've described. And so if you were born in Britain and you committed a crime, you would be able to serve your time, be rehabilitated, go out and live your life. Because you were not born in the UK, even though you may have come as a baby or a child, you are receiving effectively like a quadruple punishment, which is you are then put in detention, which is again like a jail sentence, a prison sentence again. You are then deported, and then you are effectively exiled from your family, your loved ones, your life, everything you know, to a country that you don't know, that you don't have anybody. People like Bruce, who in the summer, I want to briefly talk about the Summer of Deportations and then talk about the TUI stuff. This summer, there were 2 deportation flights to Zimbabwe, amongst others. There were weekly deportation flights. They were to Pakistan, to Jamaica, to Zimbabwe, to Vietnam, which included people that were trafficked into the UK, which was successfully challenged. There were people who came to the UK as small children, and one of them was Bruce. And Bruce, we've been supporting, has been deported on the 2nd flight to Zimbabwe, 2 flights to Zimbabwe in one summer. Bruce came to the UK when he was 9 with his mother, and lots of people came to Zimbabwe because of the from Zimbabwe because of the political situation at the time. And he was involved in a burglary when he was 18. Since then, he's been working with young people, he's involved in his local community, in a rugby club, and he's working with young people, even though he's only in his 20s himself, to keep young people in education and on the right track. And 11 years after he came out of prison, he's been deported. He has no family in Zimbabwe. His mother is an NHS worker, has been an NHS worker all this time that she's been in Britain. He has nobody whatsoever in Zimbabwe, and he's there now, and it's terrifying, and he's isolated, and he's alone, and the government gave him £40, but the government give those countries that people are being deported to several £1,000s per person, and if you've got an entire plane load of people, imagine how much money. So one of the things we mustn't forget about is the fact that those countries that are receiving the planes are complicit in the system. And one of the planes was due to go to Pakistan, and Pakistan refused to allow that plane to land. And so that is something that governments can do, but they take the money doesn't go to the person who's deported, who ends up destitute. I have people contacting me from Jamaica saying, I've got nowhere to sleep tonight and no food, can you help me? And I'm contacting charities on the ground in Jamaica to say, can you help this person tonight? So this is the situation we're in. So when we're talking about those who are complicit in the system, that of course includes the airlines and all the businesses that are involved in that deportation process. And that's what some of us that are campaigning on these issues have been targeting. So we did it with Virgin, we did it with British Airways, and there's this campaign against TUI, because TUI have operated just in this 1 year, during this year, we're not finished with this year yet, 21 deportation flights. So a range of different organisations have come together to campaign against this, and a couple of weeks ago we had simultaneous actions in several cities. There's more actions planned, and there's an action after this meeting to go to the TUI shop here in Brighton and do a direct creative action, a march from here with a samba band up to TUI. And there's more actions planned during October and November in different cities. So anybody can get involved. It's like a big range of grassroots organisations in different cities. It's different groups of people working together to campaign and putting the pressure on TUI. And what we're seeing with these summer deportations, and I am finished here and I've seen your warning, is that TUI now haven't done the most recent flights, and unofficially we're hearing that they're not doing them anymore, but they won't announce it. I've contacted their press office directly, so a number of us, but they won't say we're not doing them. But it seems like the pressure is working. But there are other, Privileged Style and Air Tanker have done some of these. Spanish airlines like Privileged Style have done some of these deportation flights over the summer. So we can't let them off the hook. We can't let anybody that's complicit in the system off the hook, whoever they are. And to finish, I want to mention some actions that you can take, if that's okay. Yeah. So obviously you can join the TUI groups in your areas. On social media you can find all the details of how to sign up, and if there isn't one in your area, you can start one, you know, in your city. We have a crowdfunder for Bruce that I mentioned, and we're raising money for him to appeal his deportation because he came as a child. He was let down by his legal team, and that's another thing. It's crucial people get the right type of legal representation and advice, the right kind of specialist lawyers. And sometimes they grab whoever they can at the time. They haven't got any money. Lawyers rip them off, take thousands of pounds off them, and then they don't do the job they're supposed to do. So we have a Crowdfunder UK fundraiser, and if you can donate to it, that would be great. Even £1.50, it all adds up. We're at around £1,000, but we need £2,500. And if not, share it. And if you go on our Twitter at Barack UK, BARAC UK, that's probably the quickest and easiest way to find all the actions we're doing. In terms of the boats being turned around, I want to say something quickly about that. So the Priti Patel's policy of turning around small boats from the channel and sending people back to sea, that's a violation of human rights, international human rights legislation and international maritime legislation. It says if you're a seafarer, you have to rescue people in the water, you can't leave people in trouble. We know people crossing the Mediterranean Sea, crossing seas, have died. And nobody puts their children and families on one of those boats unless what they're fleeing is worse than what they're facing. So it's absolutely despicable that the government are saying they're going to turn away these boats, and they're training up people as we speak on jet skis to go out and push them out to sea. This is what's happening. And so we've started this week on Action Storm a petition, and we'd really like you to sign that petition. Again, if you go on our social media, you'll find everything there. We have a petition against the Zimbabwe deportation, specifically because the government wants to target several different flights and do loads and loads of flights to Zimbabwe. And then we have another petition which is against all deportations. And so it would be great if you can sign them, because then you'll get updates from us, and we put out information about what actions you can take on our website. There are model letters that you can send to your MP, so it would be great if you do that as well. And we have a crowdfunder on Gofundme, which is for our refugee and no recourse to public funds support. And again, if you want to support that and donate or share it or do a fundraising initiative, then that would be great. So anything you can do to support our work. This is about people power. This is about us coming together collectively. Those of us that are on the receiving end of these attacks shouldn't have to face them alone. We need everybody to be involved, because if they're going for us now, it could be you and your families tomorrow. So it's really important that we stand collectively against all of what's happening. And actually, yes, some of it needs financial support, to get legal fees, to give people food, to put clothes on their back. Basic necessities that we shouldn't have to fundraise for. Everybody should have a human right to those things. But that's the reality that we're facing. So solidarity, thank you everybody for being here. But please don't just come and listen. Please go away and take action. Do what you can to support. Get involved in the actions that are there. Come on the march after this meeting. And thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sita. I think that was really powerful and useful as well to situate what's happening within the wider context of racial injustice throughout every institution in this country. The fact that this relies on white supremacy and upholding that, and a legacy of colonialism. I'm going to read out now a message from Gulwali, from Gulwali. Gulwali's an activist, author and Afghan refugee who sadly couldn't make it to today's panel. So I'm going to read out his message now. It's cool, I think I can manage, thanks though. Thanks.
Solidarity, isn't it?
Yeah, this is practical acts of solidarity. Thank you everyone for participating and attending this event. Apologies I can't be there today, but we need to keep the pressure on government that their policies of hostility, destitution, detention and deportation... Sorry about the siren, can people still hear? Okay. But we need to keep the pressure on government that their policies of hostility, destitution, detention and deportation hasn't worked. It's cruel, inhuman and immoral. We need to move away from deference to acceptance of refugees. We can't expect other countries to take on the refugees and for the UK to penalise and criminalise asylum seekers for coming here irregularly. We must remember claiming asylum is a human right. How you arrive doesn't and shouldn't determine your claim for protection. Please keep Afghans and Afghanistan in your prayers and thoughts, but also action. Thousands of people evacuated, waiting at hotels in detention-like conditions. The government must provide adequate accommodation in the community with support and resources. Around 3,000 Afghans are awaiting a decision on their asylum claims for months or even years. They've been living in limbo with thousands more failed asylum seekers and documented Afghans, as well as many with insecure status, as the Home Office argued for years that Kabul and Afghanistan was safe. So I hope these issues and challenges to respond responsibly and in a timely manner for people to move on and rebuild their lives. I would be grateful if you read my story of struggles, experiences with the Home Office when seeking asylum as a child around 14 years ago in my book, The Lightless Sky. Thank you for your time. Wishing you a wonderful weekend. Gulwali. Finally, last but not least, I'm going to pass on to Richard, who we're very fortunate to be joined by today, because Richard is another example of someone who has taken matters into his own hands and has shown practical solidarity at risk of himself. So, over to you, Richard.
Hi all. I'm here representing an organisation called Channel Rescue. We're a volunteer grassroots organisation that's emerged out of existing anti-fascist and refugee solidarity work.
Could you hold the microphone a bit closer?
Oh, sorry. This is like the first time I've ever used a microphone. I think it was a best man speech about 15 years ago. So bear with me, okay. Anything else?
Just quickly about the
Right.
mic, it's directional,
Okay.
so straight in the middle, that's all.
Can people hear me now? No.
Not the camera.
Is this going to work? We really don't want this to be the outcome of this speech, if we can.
That's it.
Right, okay. Channel Rescue was started, well, we're nearly a year old now, started officially in October last year. And it came about due to a change in what was happening in the situation in northern France and how people were getting across the channel. And what happened there was an enormous amount of money was spent by the British government in persuading the French authorities to fence off the motorways all around Calais. So obviously we've had the situation in Calais has gone on for 20 odd years now. Sangat, the jungle, the police brutality, the congregation of migrants there in extraordinarily squalid conditions, all trying to get across the channel. All utterly avoidable because the British government has outposts in Calais. People could claim asylum. We could have safe and legal routes into the UK for people claiming asylum from Calais, and that is not the case. So what's happened, what we saw last year with the construction of the motorway fencing was that the traditional is probably the wrong word, but the usual method that people were using to get onto lorries was obstructed. And we started to see people crossing in boats. And initially at least, people were crossing, we saw improvised crossings, we saw crossings organised and facilitated, so we saw people crossing in boats with small outboard motors. We also saw people going into the equivalent of Decathlon or Sports Direct in Calais and buying the kind of dinghy you buy on holiday and paddling across. It was a desperate journey across the world's busiest shipping lanes. And we've spoken to lots of people who've made this journey, and even the most organised, even when you've paid €5,000 to make this journey, you arrive on a beach in Calais in the middle of the night with your family, no luggage, you're crammed onto a rib. One person is appointed, effectively out of the people driving there, to drive that rib. In the middle of the night, you're shown the lights of Dover, and people have to make that crossing. And it's been absolutely terrifying. And we do know that people have lost their lives making that crossing. A Kurdish family lost their life. I don't know if you have heard, there was a boy called Artan who was washed up after months in Norway. An investigation showed this young lad. So it's a very dangerous crossing. Like I said, completely unavoidable. So what we've seen, as these beach landings increased, as we started to see people crossing the channel, there was increased far-right activity in Kent. Kent being somewhere where historically there's been a great deal of far-right activity in the last decade. We started to see groups of, well, we call them the vigilantes really. They originate in the far right, or they're disgruntled locals who are organising themselves to go out on beach patrols and harass and attack potentially migrants who are making the landing. We decided effectively that there needed to be some form of response from the left to this, and that's what led to the birth of Channel Rescue. And we very rapidly found ourselves embroiled in this process, this kind of three-step dance that happens between the street far right, or in this case the beach far right. The street far right, represented by people like the Little Veteran, Tommy Robinson, the remnants of the EDL, these kind of characters. The suited far right, in the shape of Farage, UKIP, and the Home Office. So we would see these beach patrols, they would go out, they would get footage, that would appear in the Mail and the Sun, that would then be great with hysterical headlines, that would then be followed by a Home Office announcement demonising these people, promising pushbacks and so on and so forth. So okay, we need to get involved here and drag this over to a window back leftwards. And I think what was interesting was it started off as a germ of an idea, put a crowdfunder up, within under 24 hours we had £20,000, which obviously leads to a kind of, oh shit, we're going to have to do this now. And that's what happened. So we launched it, and right now we have boat patrols out at sea, acting as a human rights monitoring organisation. We have regular shore patrols now in Kent and around the coast. I'll get onto that later, why we need to be around the coast. And we've sort of managed to push that, and we created a human rights monitoring project effectively. And I'm here really to appeal for support for that. What we've done with our shore patrols, we regularly have people out on the cliffs in Kent and along the Sussex coast, telescopes, binoculars, monitoring what Border Force are doing, what the RNLI are doing, watching for craft, watching for beach landings, being ready to provide assistance to those beach landings if they occur. So we first aid kits, foil blankets, food. So we're ready with that, and that's happened on more than one occasion. That assistance has been required, either with or without the presence of the authorities. So that's effectively has disrupted the far right attempts to do this, to make this their territory. We've organised solidarity demonstrations at the Napier Barracks in an effort there really to steal the initiative from the far right, who organised quite successfully. Do people know about the Penally Barracks? Okay, so there were 2 barrack sites that were set up specifically as a result of the Channel crossings becoming part of the culture war. They were designed as, exhibitionary, punitive. They were meant to be punitive barracks to be able to put in the tabloid press that people who were crossing the Channel were being punished. In Wales, not a site I've ever visited, but the far right was successful there in gaining the initiative, and they got a lot of the locals out to demonstrate against the existence of the facility, and we were determined not to let that happen in Folkestone. So we organised a big welcome demo and got 600 locals out, and I think there illustrated something that we want to do with Channel Rescue. I actually think that the majority of people in this country actually want a humane environment, but I think the pattern in the press is to make you feel isolated, to make you feel like everyone else in the country is a nutter who brings into Radio 5 and sounds off about immigrants. And I think actually the minute you do anything like this, you realise how many people are on side, and that was important. I think creating events, creating organisations whereby people can show their solidarity is, physically on the ground, is a really important part of this struggle, and that's kind of something we're aiming to do with Channel Rescue. Visible and active solidarity, and also being in there, being a voice in the media, being able to sort of counterpoint directly. Farage did a whole hour-long programme about us recently, but the fact we existed meant that debate had to be had. Very quickly going to run through some of the sort of recent developments. So a lot of moaning on the right about how Priti Patel has given millions to the French to prevent these landings, and nothing is being done. Actually, it is being done, and one of the things we're seeing that is making this, and I reiterate, wholly avoidable situation worse, is that the French police are now disrupting launches in Calais on the beaches. Now in Calais, you've got this obviously the narrowest point of the channel. You've got 26 miles. You can do that in 8 or 9 hours with a small outboard. Still an absolutely terrifying journey, but you can do it. But because they're disrupting the launches there, we're now seeing launches from further south, and we're seeing more and more people landing not where we were, which is north and south of Dover, because that's all people are doing is aiming for the lights of Dover at night. That's why they launch at night, and they're aiming for that. So we were seeing beach landings either side, Samphire Hoe, Kingsdown, places like that. Now people are launching from Dunkirk and Boulogne, so they're looking at a much longer sea journey, 18 or 19 hours, and they're landing in Dungeness, and we're even starting to see landings now in Hastings and Eastbourne. I don't know how many people are local, but that's really near here. That's a long way from France to be coming in a boat, and it is dangerous, and these are families at sea. The other development we're seeing that's really worrying is whoever's facilitating this. Last year we saw mostly ribs that have probably been stolen from marinas across Europe, or even purchased specifically for the journey. Now we're starting to see craft that look very much like they're being homemade, like they're being knocked up in a factory. So we're seeing these huge ribs that are capable of having 40 or 50 people in them, that are obviously designed for one-off journeys. And one thing we have noticed is as Border Force take the ribs, they drag them into Dover Harbour and they store them there. Huge pile of ribs. What's happening in the sunlight, the tubes on those ribs are bursting because a properly equipped craft has pressure release valves. So you can imagine a boat that's been fully inflated in France in the middle of the night, very cold. The sunlight is hitting those tubes and heating them up, so they do pop. And as people are making longer and longer sea journeys, there's every likelihood that one of these craft is just going to go. Or this may have already happened. That's the terrifying thing about this. This may have already happened. So that's one development. The next, we happen to witness, Channel Rescue shore monitors were able to witness this jet ski practice that they've done. So Priti Patel's made this announcement that they're going to start practicing pushbacks. We're not sure how that's going to work practically. How much of that's fodder for the tabloid press. It's certainly a worrying development. People we know have talked to the Border Force crews, and most of the Border Force crews on the boats are locally recruited. So they're fishermen, they're people with boat experience, and they are, as a rule, generally pretty committed to the Seafarers Code of Conduct. But what we're being told about the jet ski guys is they're being recruited directly from onshore Border Force and trained to use jet skis. So with the idea perhaps that they won't have those scruples. So it is possible we may see a jet ski pushback, and that's something, you know, we need to be out in the, we need to be observing that out of the 12-mile limit and see how that's actually going to pan out when that's first put into practice. Oh, well, there's tons more to say, but I'm hoping there'll be a question and answer session. I really encourage people. I think specifically Kent volunteers. There's some really, really solid people volunteering in Kent. As you can imagine, they're swimming against the tide there a bit. This is where Farage stood for election, what was it, 7 times he's tried? But nonetheless, there's a groundswell of support there. Dover is not a welcoming place for immigrants. We need people to support the solidarity works of Kent, really. So I'd encourage you to go and look at our website, channelrescue.wordpress.com, follow us on Twitter and find out more about the work we do. And if anyone's got any questions, then let us know.
Thank you so much, Richard. The anti-fascist struggles that you're involved in are literally life-saving, and I think all of that goes to show that just as the far right is internationalist and organises across borders, so must we. I'm going to open it up now to contributions and questions from the floor. We've got about probably like 20 minutes. Is that about right? I'm terrible at timekeeping, that's why I'm looking at Hattie. I'm going to try and take a good selection of people, and I'd actively encourage contributions, not just questions. But please try to keep them as concise as possible so that as many people who want to speak can. But I'm not wanting to shut people up. So yeah, hands up. Yes, in the jumpsuit, please.
This is probably for Richard. Just thinking about with the jet skis and stuff, the drones that they're going to start surveilling the channel, and I mean it's it's really scary because obviously they will be able to guide jet skis and things to where they're seeing the boats, and they're not manned drones, so it's really easy for them to be, you know, hovering around all the time watching people. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. I'm going to take them in rounds of 3, by the way, so please keep. Yeah, comrade with the beard.
Yeah, just reflecting really on Ben mentioned the divide and rule trick being like the oldest trick in the book. I guess the point is it's also a very effective trick, and while I'm hearing the stuff about, I would love as well to believe that we live in a society where people do want humane and just solutions. We're actually living in a reality where we've got an 80-seat Conservative majority, and significant numbers of people are quite excited about the idea of Priti Patel sinking boats in the Channel, or of protesters being criminalised. And I guess we had a situation in December 2019 where people had a choice, if you like, between socialism and barbarism, and a significant number of people went, barbarism sounds all right, as it does. So I guess, what do we do to counter that narrative? How do we kind of create solidarities and kind of break down that divide and rule narrative?
It's a really important question, probably one that we could and have actually spent the last decades trying to answer. Yeah, fair point, Richard. Comrade with the beard doesn't really narrow it down. I'll do better on the descriptions next time. Yeah, with the cool earrings. Sorry.
Thank you. I didn't think of them as cool earrings, but no, this is mostly a point because I know that all speakers have mentioned different sides to the same struggle. And it's just a gentle reminder that we are here all to try to gain more people to join us in these struggles. But for me, it's so important that when we do so, we do outside of that narrative of when we're trying to convince people about why migrants or refugees or asylum seekers have a right to be here, we move away from but remember that they were suffering, therefore we need to do this for them, because that's a narrative that sometimes is around. So you're trying to convince somebody who, I don't know, has some bigoted views on immigration, and you start telling them about the whole horrors of the asylum seeker that got here. But actually, we need to challenge the whole anti-immigration narrative. We are here because we're here first because you were there, and second, and second because it is a human right. Like, we have throughout our history migrated, and nobody is keeping track with like all of the European migrations towards the global south. So it's just challenging that. And I mean, obviously you want to have an easy conversation, but try to avoid falling on those sort of PT arguments, because that's not helpful. That's just continue supporting we need to support the good immigrants, and the rest, well, they're not deserving.
I think that's an extremely important point, and it plays into that issue of respectability politics again, and expecting people to bear their trauma to be deserving of fundamental rights, when it doesn't matter what's, in a sense, it doesn't matter what's happened to someone, or whether they're a good person or not. You know, refugees don't have to be scaling burning buildings, rescuing children to be deserving of fundamental human and workers' rights. Who wants to start with responses? Should we just go in this direction?
Just responding to the question about drones, really, which I guess falls within my purview. There have definitely drones, manned aircraft. The Channel is under enormous surveillance. Again, I think this is why we're seeing this move to launch them further south. I think the opportunism of initially 2019 and then 2020, that's over. We're seeing far fewer beach landings. Border Force have really been beefed up in the number of craft they have in the area. We're seeing a lot more interceptions at sea, which is why the boat patrols have become more vital to our work. We are still seeing what we've seen is so basically that's happened. I guess in answer to your question, drones are absolutely part of the package of the militarisation of what's going on. If they want to do pushbacks, they're going to do pushbacks. There's not going to be a logistical challenge to that. What we're seeing, the strategy is difficult work. We don't really know how all this is organised, because it's illegal. But so we're seeing mass launches. So we'll see a day, there'll be days of good weather, perfect for crossings, nothing will happen, and then suddenly 40 boats will happen at once, and that's what we're seeing. So, I mean, there's tons to say about how join us. Join the Clifftop team to find out more.
I'm going to take the barbarism question. I can mostly remember what it was. I just wrote barbarism, which wasn't actually that helpful. People are good. I fundamentally, I fundamentally believe that most people in this country and across the world want a nice life. They want a nice life for them and for the people that they know. The 2019 general election, I still get acid flashbacks to that exit poll, and can't really quite get my head around what happened, because it was traumatic, and you suddenly do wake up thinking, oh fuck, do we live in a country full of sociopaths? But then you kind of start to think about it, and there have been moments of hope. And if you think about what happened around Windrush, there was this kind of this moment, this collective moment where suddenly the narrative was kind of in our favor, just for the briefest of seconds. And obviously, as Zia was kind of explaining, it's still ongoing, that the scandal is ongoing, nothing's really changed. But the media, the way that the media turned around, the way that people in this country started talking about Windrush. I mean, a Home Secretary, a Tory minister, actually resigned for once. And I think that kind of shows you that there is hope. And if you look at the kind of where the swell of feeling, and this is a very sort of broad brush that doesn't take into account a lot of local factors, but broadly speaking, where people are most anti-immigration is where there's least immigration. And the reality is, what we can do is, and it's kind of what I was getting to, and the point I was getting to in terms of Labour very much losing its way, is that actually putting forward the narrative that people deserve fundamental human rights, that people deserve dignity, and being bold and being brave with that. And I don't think that there has been a Labour leadership, and as much as I think Corbynism was great and incredible and refreshing, they were still shit, frankly, on migration. There was, even in the 2017 general election manifesto, they still kept no recourse to public funds in there. And so we need a Labour Party, we need a movement that is bold and that is able to kind of go out and make these points. And once we start doing that bravely and boldly, and understanding where people are and coming to people where they are and talking to people in our communities and wider communities. I grew up, I lived in 50 something houses in my life, and caravans and stuff. I've grown up in lots of different places across the country, majoritively in poor areas, majoritively sort of around the coast. It was very, very poor working class places. People just want to be happy, people just want security and safety, and they are scared and they are terrified. And we have had a decade of austerity where we have seen the rug pulled out from communities across the country, as Zita was talking about earlier. The working class has been under attack, and at the same time, that divide and rule tactic has been employed. What we need to do is start saying, it's not these people, it's not the other, whatever that other is, in whatever iteration it is on that day, whatever culture war thing the government has decided to deploy on that day. What it is the people in Westminster that have done this. It is the bankers, it is the global financial structures, it is the capitalism. When we start making those arguments, we start really, really strongly pushing forward, and I said, this drive for dignity, that's when we win. And we can win, we absolutely can win. We just have to have hope and perseverance, and those are the key things.
Thank you. So I wanted to say something about, changing how we change the narrative, and this sort of divide of good and bad migrants that have developed. I'm an internationalist. I'm a global citizen, a citizen of the world. I come from a migrant family, a family who have migrated here and have also migrated around the globe. So I don't have that personally, that sense of this is my land, this is my country and my territory, because I haven't grown up. But lots of people have. And a lot of the reason why people think with that mentality. Of course, it's what the governments feed into them, it's what the media's feed into them, they're buying into that. The scapegoating of migrants is one of the major problems that's caused this kind of divide and rule, and blaming migrant workers and migrant communities for the lack of jobs, the lack of housing, to try and deflect from the government's failures on these issues and what the government has selling off council housing, privatising and outsourcing, mass redundancies, how they responded to austerity, and so on. So all of those things are interlinked, and I think sometimes people try and separate all these things out and don't look at the bigger picture and don't look at how these things are linked. And as I said earlier, it's the legacies of colonialism and enslavement as to why some of us are here. But it's also about the fact that Britain is dependent on migrant labour. So I think we have to remind people of that the country would fall apart. When we're talking about the Windrush generation, post-World War II, people were asked to come. The UK government went and directly recruited in Caribbean countries to help the country recover. And if we look at what's happened during the pandemic, and the NHS would have completely collapsed and wouldn't exist, and people would be dead. Even more people would be dead than we've already seen, which is horrendous enough, if there wasn't migrant labour, migrant communities working in care. If we look at all the essential services that have run during the pandemic, that's dependent on migrant labour. So I think sometimes we need to flip it and remind people of that. The things that they take for granted. In fact, even people working in offices, their offices are clean when they come into work, and that's migrant workers usually that have cleaned their offices. The cup of coffee they pick up on the way to work or in work, that's usually migrant workers. But economically, the country wouldn't be able to sustain itself. The scientists and experts and consultants and all sorts of different people working in different industries, the creative sector would collapse if it wasn't. And this all helps the economy. So when they're saying we're draining the economy, actually we're benefiting and holding the economy up and holding the country up. And I think we need to remind people of that. And sometimes we just need to tell it as it is and not try and skirt around the issues, and just sort of be quite bold and quite open and just state what is obvious, but people have been conditioned mentally to disregard or to think in a certain way and think they have to defend their community against some fake notion that we're there to attack them, when in actual fact they wouldn't survive without us here.
I'm going to fit in as many as possible now, and if we've got time we'll come back to the panel, but I'm keen to hear from you. So other comrades with the beard, and then person in the XR badge, and then comrade at the back in the tan jacket and the orange top.
Yeah,
oh,
thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, I wanted to refer back to my other comrade with the beard over there, the point that he was making, and several other people have taken up, and that is, generally we have got on our side the fact that people do want to, they are outraged when they actually find out what's involved in of immigration controls, all the methods that have to be used. And it seems clear to me that we've been on a pretty steep learning curve over the last few years, and we know what the stages of it were. I thought the first stage of that was a reaction to the go home bans, which was not a success as far as the Home Office were concerned. People actually did not like feeling that they were being told that they had to brass on their neighbours. It went on 2015 with huge demonstrations taking place across the country, over 100,000 people in London over the situation, the refugee situation in the Mediterranean. Then the Windrush, the reaction to the Windrush scandal. Since then there's been COVID, where we've actually have been finding out exactly the work that migrants, key work, the essential work that migrants have been doing, and now at this point in time we're learning about Brexit, supply chain crisis, and so on and so forth. So all of this is being assembled. It's out there. The arguments there, all of which are making it extremely uncomfortable for people with anti-immigration standpoints. So what does it mean for us? Our difficulty is our strength, is the other side of our strength, basically. The thing about people involved in immigration rights is their work goes off in 1,001 different directions. There is always another project propping up for them to get involved in, whether it's about detention issues, whether it's no recourse to public funds, whether it's about the people crossing the channel. There's 1,001 different things to do. Our problem with that is it's gnat bites on the hide of an elephant. We haven't yet come up with a narrative which is capable of dominating the sea. And my feeling is, and I'll finish up on this point, I'm involved in a fairly new initiative called the Status Now Network, which thinks that narrative that we ought to be aiming for is a demand for a complete review of everybody with precarious immigration status in the country and pressing the government in order to confirm that. 130 odd organisations have signed up to this, including all the big ones, but it would be really good if that could be reflected in the debates which are taking place around the Labour Party, because at the moment there is no debate within the Labour Party that reflects the changing moods that are actually taking place out there in the population.
I am just in awe of what we've heard today, and thank you three so much for sharing the brave and outstanding steps you have taken, and for sharing them with us. I learned so much new today. I didn't know about all this on the top of the cliffs in Kent. I didn't know about the Stansted. I had heard about the Stansted 15, but it's so wonderful to put faces to the actions that you read about in the left-wing press. So thank you so much, and what you're doing with the detainees and the planes and everything, thank you so much. I'm operating in a much more mundane and localized activity on migrant issues, which anybody here can join in. You don't have to go and be as bold as you are all being. And it's to do with the health service and patients and our passports, and trying to raise people's awareness of the undermining of the universality of the health service for migrants. And I have built up a coalition just in the borough where I work in Lambeth, which has united the Labour Party, a Labour Council, all the MPs, the church, all the different church groups, trade unions, and we are trying to get our local hospital trust, Guy's and St Thomas's, just opposite the House of Commons, to raise their voice against it and stop being the border guards. The chief executive just writes back saying, we have to do this by law. We have to do, but we are good. We do treat people as if they're seriously ill. We do still treat them and only give them a bill afterwards. And I was in a really inspiring demonstration in Sheffield to support a Zimbabwean who's Simba last weekend, who has had a bill for £100,000. And there was a wonderful march, only 300 people on it, but through the centre of Sheffield, in a lovely sunny day with a samba band like we're going to do today, and everybody in the streets were grabbing leaflets. And I think raising awareness of how the hostile environment is affecting people having to choose between destitution or health, because these people can't pay these bills. They are being driven into illegality and the threat of deportation. If you've got a bill for over £500 for more than 2 months, the hospital has to tell the Home Office so that they can deport you. And I just met this week a wonderful woman, Angela, in Lambeth, who has come out and spoken. There's a film made about her. She had £7,000 bill for a hysterectomy, and there wasn't told at the time she'd even be charged. So these things are all going on under the radar, but in every area we can set up patients in our passports groups. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a member of the public. You know, we can all do this, but it's something that the Labour Party locally, which is really solid progress, I've got them their wholehearted support, and it can unify because people have a humanity which we have to tap into and challenge the barbarism. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to joining you on the demonstration.
the glasses in the sort of like tan trench? Oh, sorry, it's not a trench. It's more of a shacket.
I just had a question really. I was reading over the summer about a particular case, a gay man called Saiful Alam. He was basically fearing that if he was deported to Bangladesh, he may face life imprisonment for being gay, and he'd face harassment. And in desperation, he faked identity documents. He was then taken to Hull Crown Court, where he was imprisoned for a year for faking those documents. It's often individual cases like these that really touch us, and reading the case, I contacted various groups, didn't get very far, contacted people like Peter Tatchell to try and get him interested in raising the profile of this case. And I just had a question about what you would suggest doing when we read about something like this, because you do just feel quite powerless to affect individual cases like that.
Thank you, Comrade. Please let us know. I mean, do you have asks of the room here about what we can all do to support your actions?
I just don't know what to do. You know, I've obviously told you about the case. I mean, I could speak to you about it afterwards, perhaps.
Yeah, let's definitely speak afterwards. But also, I'm sure there'll be lots of ideas in the room. But full solidarity and like anything that any of us can do to support. Should we get some more contributions? I think we've got room for a couple more.
Yeah. So, possibly very obvious, but it was just a kind of observation that I worked through in my head as you were all speaking. There seems to be, the way the narrative is controlled, like obviously, as we've heard, individual cases and individual groups are extremely important, and we do need to think about those particular real situations. But at the same time, it does seem that somehow the way the narrative is controlled is you choose a particular subset that's manageable and you give ground on that. So you say, oh, the Windrush generation, yes, that was a scandal, that is terrible, we'll fix that. And when that one specific thing is fixed, then you can carry on like tarring with the same brush dog whistles about immigrants and all of the awful things that you imply about them without ever saying them outright. And yeah, so I just wanted to make that observation about how things can be controlled by splitting them between specific cases and a general problem that's going to carry on business as usual.
It's a really important point, thank you. I'm going to give literally 30 seconds to everyone on the panel to answer anything or give thoughts on anything, in particular the case in Hull, if people have practical suggestions around that, and then I'll bring things to a close.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to comment on that case. So we support lots of individual cases. Sometimes we run campaigns or lead campaigns. What's crucial is what that individual and their family want to happen and how they want other people to be involved. So I don't know how much you've established of that, but I think that's important because we can't lead campaigns on behalf of people without their permission of what they want to do and how they want it run. But we're happy to talk to you if you want to, contact us. We can talk through some of the things we would do. So sometimes we run petitions, we do letter writing campaigns to MPs. There's loads of practical things you can do to raise awareness, to raise money for fees, to put people in touch with lawyers, because we have a sister organisation, Black and Asian Lawyers for Justice, which we Barrett co-founded. And so we have a team of lawyers that can give legal advice and to support campaigns. We also work with organisations like UK Black Pride and other black and brown led LGBT campaigns that could help and support. So yeah, there's lots of practical things we could suggest, but I think it's really about speaking to the individual concerned about how they would want a campaign run, how much they want in the public domain, what they want done, and then taking it from there. But happy for you to contact us after the meeting, and yeah, we're happy to help.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Zita.
Thanks. I was meant to think of something to say, wasn't it? No, that's all right, I can wing it. I think I just echo what Zita said, and to kind of, to build on it and say that there's so much talent, there's so much knowledge, there's so much energy within the movement and within so many groups that exist and that have existed for so long. The only reason that the Stansted 15 could do what we did was because of decades worth of work by people inside and outside of detention, incredible people like Aderonke Apara, who led uprisings in Yarlswood in 2012 and started to bring some of the abuses within that system to light. So when in the kind of case of these individual cases, absolutely as Zita said, kind of check in with the family, with the person, what do they want, what would be helpful, what can you do as your first port of call, and if they are wanting support and help, go out and speak to Barak, speak to any of the incredible migrant rights charities, organisations and groups that exist across the country, because there are so many infinitely more talented people than me who are much more well versed in all of this, who dedicate their lives to doing this and smash it and do this. And so I guess that would be my advice.
I've only really been involved as a full-blown activist in migrant solidarity for a couple of years, and I have to say, as a movement, I've never come across one quite as fragmented, perhaps without being rude to any of the people who put tons of work into it, incoherent. So I would say there needs to be more networking. I don't think we need to centralise the movement, because I think that might destroy the magic of the people who are doing it. I think that's what I was trying to hint at earlier, is there are tens of thousands of people involved in doing migrant solidarity, wherever there are people put in hotels. We've just had there's 2 hotels in Brighton now. Networks are springing up. People are trying to take inspiration from activism that's happened around the country, feed those people, give them aid, give them the solidarity we need. And I think that's what we need, to network this better and learn lessons from each other. That would be the first thing. And I think the other thing to understand is this is not charity, this is solidarity. The reason we are having a culture war against, there's a really good article which is basically Britain does not have a refugee crisis, so it had to invent one. This is part of their project. This is the divide and rule, and this is why refugee solidarity is absolutely vital to any active class war that we need to undertake. We need to cohere around this, so that we need to blunt this offensive if we want to go anywhere. Otherwise their project will succeed and ours will fail.
Thank you so much to everyone on the panel, Zita, Ben, Richard. I honestly feel so privileged to be sharing a platform with you all today. You've all done just the most incredible work in your communities and workplaces, and it's had results. And I think if I was to summarise and reflect on some of the contributions that have been made today, a thread that has run through all of them has been solidarity, and the fact that that is the fundamental principle on which our movement is built. It's not about speaking for people, it's about speaking with people, standing with people, amplifying their voices and their demands. And we've heard from 3 incredible activists today about how all of our fights, whether it's fights as queer people, as people of colour, as workers born in this country, or as migrants and refugees, all of those fights are inseparable, they're connected. And the other thing that I think has been really clear is that it's not individuals, it's not exceptional people, and it's certainly not Parliament that brings about change. It's movements, and all of us have power in that. And throughout history, it's always been movements that have won change. So just lastly, a bit of reflection on the Labour Party, because that's something that has been brought up. I completely agree with everything that you said on that, Ben. And I would urge people, if you're members of the Labour Party, to remain as members. Many of you I can see here, we organised together in 2019 a conference for the Labour Campaign for Free Movement motion to ban all detention, close all detention centres, scrap no recourse to public funds, defend and extend free movement, and that is still Labour's policy. So parliamentarians should be in Parliament amplifying that and fighting for it. No more triangulating from the Labour Party, which isn't just a problem now, it's been a problem for decades and decades. I've always said that the Labour Party has never been an anti-racist party. We're a party with anti-racists in it. So we have to populate the party and to keep amplifying the demands of grassroots campaigns. Just to highlight opportunities and campaign work that's happening. We've heard from Zita, the crowdfunder for Bruce, also the petition against pushing back boats, and the Stop TUI campaign. So you can find that on the, is it at Barak UK on Twitter. Heard from the comrade here about the Patients Not Passports campaign, so please have a look in your local area and see whether there's anything going on. If not, start it. And I can't remember what it was called, but it sounded like a really excellent campaign and there was applause.
Status Now Network.
Status Now Network.
Google it, you'll get to our website.
Okay, fantastic. And now we've heard about all of. Oh, and sorry, I'm the last person who should be chairing any panel. And of course, Channel Rescue, which is just doing absolutely heroic work. So please support in whatever way you can. So we've heard about all of the problems, we've heard about the resistance that's happening. Now it's time to put that into action ourselves. We're going to be leading a demo to the TUI store in Brighton. It's just a 10-minute walk away. So those who want to join, and I hope as many of you can, as who can will, join us. We'll be meeting outside the banners. See you there.